Please join me in welcoming Marty Nichols.
Thanks. I was prepared to say good afternoon. It says that down there, but obviously it's still morning, just for a moment. The most nervous part of my day is actually as I walked over then thinking, what was sent as my bio for this event? And it's an interesting one because it's one of those abstracts you submit 4 months ago and you think to yourself, this is a great topic, talk about it, people will be interested, they'll want to know about it, and then you actually, in the light of day, a few months later, start to prepare it, realise that everything that was mentioned then in my bio has nothing to do with AI, what am I thinking? And so I need to probably set expectations with what you're going to hear here. Unfortunately, I don't have any conflict of interest apart from the usual ones about working for New South Wales Ambulance. I would love to be saying that I had shares in some AI companies. I think that would be good for the future. But what you're not going to get here is a masterclass in generative AI because I'm not a subject matter expert in that. What I am is a paramedic manager who's gone through a journey over a few months of how I use it and implement it into my work life that, again, back in late March, I thought would be interesting to share with you all. I'm also mindful, though, that 3 or 4 months have passed now, and there's probably many of you here in this room who know as much as I do and have used generative AI, and in particular ChatGPT, as much as me. And in particular, I've had a number of people come up to me and say, I'm really looking forward to this talk. And again, that started to get me a bit concerned about exactly what they thought they were going to get. What happened for me is that I decided that over the last 10 years, a good use of my time would be to very, very slowly study law. Has taken 10 years, and I'm currently in the last subject. What was interesting was last session I was doing one of the capstone subjects, and instead of focusing on an area of law like tort or contract or administration law, they actually got us to start to prepare for practice. So I went into this subject all excited, thinking I know I'm gonna have to write briefs. I'm gonna have to, assess a legal decision to see whether an appeal is warranted. And I was shocked when the first assignment was, you're starting a new law firm, design a chatbot for your law firm's website to help inform clients who come to your website for information. I thought, I'm doing law, I'm not doing a coding course, having to learn how to design these. That then, at the same time, led to a point that I was having some interest in technology, and I like to listen to some tech podcasts, and everyone was talking about generative AI. And then a mistake was made when it was decided that for work I should travel to Perth, and we all know what a trip from Sydney to Perth is like, with time at the airport, the flight, and then at the other end. And at that same time, David and his team had the closing date for abstracts coming up quick for the CAA Congress. My boss, my executive director, was really encouraging me to put forward some abstracts. And so that then started my journey with actually using generative AI and ChatGPT at work, which at the start I thought was all positive, and it's still mostly positive, but I think there are some issues that I want to share with you mostly today. Of course, we talk about AI. We've all heard about it for decades now. Whenever I hear AI, of course, given my age and my generation, I think of Skynet taking over the world. But rather than such a doom and gloom view of it, we'll just get stuck into it straight away. So ChatGPT is one program, process, model that's involved in generative AI. And if you want to create an account, if you haven't done so, you go to the OpenAI website, you sign up, there's a free version and a premium version, and you just presented this very blank screen to look at. And so we can start with, we'll just ask the AI what AI is. And this is how people get into it, their first very easy questions. And what you'll find is you get a response that actually goes for pages and pages. There's about 4 paragraphs there that I haven't cut and pasted. But it doesn't really help me much. Computer systems that perform tasks that typically require human intelligence. Ask it what generative AI is, and kind of sounds pretty similar to me there, but the key differences focusing on creating models capable of generating new data. So apart from thinking, well, they've put the term generating in there, or generative, so it's involved in the creation phase, didn't really help me at all. The way I kind of got what it was about, and if there is any AI architects or developers in the room, I am really sorry for destroying what's a really complex area. But I think about it like my use of the internet and my iPhone. So we all know that we could Google things. So we Google, what is AI? And we know that we get a list of thousands and thousands of web pages turn up. Problem is, the first one's the sponsored link, isn't it? So it's the one someone's paid for to have there, not necessarily the best source. And then there's all these algorithms that Google use and other search engines which give us ones that are more popular to come up first. And then I've got to go and sift through all of that and find the quality. If I'm driving my car or walking around, I can just ask Siri. But Siri really just does something very similar to that, where it does its own web search, and that's why if you look at it on your phone sometimes, it literally just starts listing websites for you. What AI does is very complex, and I am not going to walk you through this unlabeled diagram, but I'm going to summarise it down to how I understand it. Something like ChatGPT takes all the data we feed into the model. So it takes the billions of websites of written text and it consumes it and understands it. And then the reason why it's called ChatGPT is that GPT actually stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. And the part you need to focus on there is the pre-trained part. So they actually then, in the early development days, they get people to sit in front of the computers. And as they ask it questions or it produces content, people then actually start telling it whether that was a good response or a bad response. And the reason it's called ChatGPT is in previous generations, there were different ones. There was previously Instruct GPT. And the difference is that it was in the names. Instruct was you told it what to do. You asked it to give you a definition and it gave you that definition. ChatGPT's moved to that next level and it's got what's called natural language recognition, and you can actually have a chat with it. And we've all experienced this with chatbots and the like. It's that part, that next step, that gets interesting for us in healthcare. But for anyone who hasn't used it, I'll give you a couple quick things to avoid your pitfalls to get you going better. So I'm at the airport, flying to Perth, CIA abstracts are due. And I spend a lot of time in New South Wales Ambulance working on clinical practice guidelines. Going to be a lot of slides, a lot of words. You don't need to read them. So I have no idea how to use it, done no real research. So I start this instruction, which is how you've got to think about it, by saying, I want to create a 250-word abstract that outlines, and then I summarise my whole body of work on clinical practice guidelines. Within seconds, ChatGPT comes back with a pretty good looking abstract. It's really just expanded on the paragraph that I've given it. It hasn't really done a lot of its own generation. This may look familiar to the people that reviewed abstracts. And then I just read over it, proofread it, make sure that there's no issues, tweak a bit, provide some context. And you know what? Within 5 minutes I was done. Would have taken me at least half hour to 2 hours to write that out. Normal speed, so now I'm excited, right? The next one, I think I'll let the AI do its thing a bit more. So this time I just tell it, can you create a 250-word abstract? I add some extra context, a conference abstract, to see if it'll tailor it a bit better for me, about the legal concept of reasonableness. I love the concept of reasonableness. Probably all of you couldn't care, but it's really interesting. It's through all aspects of law, from administration to workplace health and safety to negligence. It's the amazing concept. With that one sentence, it produced a pretty impressive abstract that I spent about 10 minutes tweaking, making it appropriate to the Australian context, threw in some Australian legislation, and I was pretty impressed. I then had to start to look around, well, what are other people using ChatGPT for? And when you look at some of the information that's produced out there, you start to see that drafting documents is really one of the key things that it gets used for early on. Powering chatbots, you're probably all sitting there going, well, of course, Marty, powering chatbots, of course that's one of the things it's doing. And then you can start to think about different use cases and you start to get really excited. So next week I'm at work, I get asked to think about a communication strategy for a change management process we're going through. Now, I'm a clinician by trade, and even though I can talk okay, I'm not really good at drafting communication strategies, so ChatGPT to the rescue. One sentence instruction, I was given the equivalent of 2 or 3 pages of a summary of a communication strategy. Talks about objectives, target audiences, nice little contextualised paragraph sentences that looks really good when you hand it to your boss. Key messages, how we're going to do it, the different communication channels. At the end, it's got timelines and evaluation, and that was all given to me in 5 seconds and a 1-sentence instruction. I then spend however long I want, 5 minutes, 5 hours going through, tweaking, tailoring, but I've got the bones or the skeleton of what actually looks like a pretty impressive communication strategy, and I didn't even know how to write a communication strategy before that. Next week, I'm convening a recruitment panel, and I'm reading the responses to the targeted questions that we ask our applicants. And I'll be honest with you, some of them are pretty bad, and mainly because they lacked structure. You know, they're a problem question, but yet I was just given this information without any structure, without any introduction, without any conclusion. So I just go onto the New South Wales Ambulance employment website, find a job that's vacant. We had one here for nurse educator in our Area Medical Control Centre. I'll have a look at that. I'll do an application for myself, see how good ChatGPT can do this for me. And I think this is a part that should be of interest to many of you who are involved in recruitment. One of the questions there, describe a time you were responsible for developing and delivering training material and how you ensured deadlines. Actually, no, it was the other one, receptive feedback. Read the wrong one out. The first question there about dealing with a trainee, having issues with feedback, and provide an example. And so I just asked ChatGPT to address that one for me. I've got a 4,000 character limit, so within this time, 4,000 characters, respond to the following job application question. I didn't really know how to instruct it better than that. And then just cut and paste the question. The answer it produced, I would have given the best marks to out of any of the applications I read the day previous for a different job. And it really got me thinking about, now can I ever trust any application that comes in front of me ever again from anyone? Again, it's structured well. It goes through those key parts. It talks about different approaches, different strategies, building trust, thinking about communication styles, you know, all those key ticks as you're marking, and particularly when you're marking dozens of applications you're just looking for. And then again, I spent a few minutes for the exercise, tweaking it to myself, putting in some specific context about a situation that I've actually been in, so that it's not, you know, just computer generated, it's actually truthful situation I've been involved in. But it produced a near perfect response in the appropriate size for what I needed. And again, something that previously I'd sit in front of the computer for about an hour, I was done in 5 minutes. Didn't submit this, it wasn't for an actual job I applied for. But that's when it really clicked on me, and it really dawned how this is actually out there, that it's consumed all this information, and it's now actually thinking about how it's going to apply it. When you get into how it does it, it actually, rather than where we just ask Siri to tell us about, you know, the temperature in Brisbane today, and it goes to a website and it then reads off from that website, you know, what the temperature is. If you ask ChatGPT a question, it'll actually, after each word of its response, it thinks about the next word, and it kind of looks at, well, what's the best word? What's the most popular word? How's that going to go towards the end of the sentence? Because it knows within first few words probably what the whole sentence is going to look like. But it doesn't always pick the best word. There's a little bit of randomization occurring in here as well. So if you go home and you play with it and you ask it to define AI 10 times, you'll get questions that are basically the same after you read them, but you'll find different words and different terms put throughout there, which is really interesting. And that's how it goes to that next level. And now that it's also got this chat ability, this natural language aspect to it, that's where things get really interesting for healthcare. So people have started to apply, to do stuff with ChatGPT. It's able to pass the US medical licensing exam without having ever gone to medical school. Makes me start thinking about, does it have a role beyond what we heard of last night? For those who were at the dinner, we saw how, we can use technology to help take 000 calls, for example. Should every ambulance service in the future have systems like this to provide health information? Should people be able to come to the ambulance internet site in your state and say, I have a headache, what should I do? And should they engage in a discussion with a chatbot powered by ChatGPT about that? Gets used in law. So Pakistani judge actually referred to it in coming to a legal decision and actually wrote about it in the decision as well. And that's the key part, actually. Look, it's really well suited to things like law because you've just got to consume all the legislation that exists out there, all the case law precedent, and then apply it. And it's actually quite a good context for it. But how would you feel if you're then reading the judgment of a case that involved you and your judge is citing the chatbot or ChatGPT in how they helped to get to their decision making? Where this actually works quite nicely is that previously the judge could have gone, well, I've got to look up the appropriate act, and then I've got to find the appropriate section, and then I've got to think about it, read it, and apply it. And what ChatGPT's done here is gone exactly right. This section, this act, and the court has some ability to make its own judgment in this case. It does, however, though, then straight away jump to your consideration of limitations. And there are some that you need to be mindful of, and I wasn't mindful of them for the first few months I was playing around with it. Which is funny because when you actually first log on, this is the front screen you get at the OpenAI website. The right-hand column there, it actually talks about some of its main limitations. And if you actually read those, and I didn't, it's quite concerning. May occasionally generate incorrect information. May occasionally produce harmful instructions or biased content. Limited knowledge of the world and events after 2021. If you remember, I said it's a pre-trained model. The model hasn't been trained with anything in what's called ChatGPT 3.5. There's now a version 4, but most people have been using 3.5 after September 2021. So if you go back to the legal situation, if the legislation changed in the last 18 months, that's not included in the response. If you go back to the medical situation, if there's been some key changes in medical management of a condition, it's 18 months behind where the evidence base has gone. And there's a few other things to be mindful of as well. Apart from the 2021 knowledge issue, which that'll be fixed probably in the future, and I'm sure they'll get that more up to date, there's big concerns around a couple of areas. Plagiarism. The same university I'm enrolled in currently doing my last subject sent out a notice to all students a few weeks back saying that the university's banned the use of ChatGPT or generative AI in the preparation of assignments. They reckon last session for a particular subject, they had 100 students and they had about 15 to 20 papers that were pretty much exactly the same. So they've now banned its use. And of course, when they use things like Turnitin to review the content, it was actually able to identify those similarities pretty well. You don't know where it comes from. What I've shown you, the screenshots, is what it gives you back. It was never designed, as far as I can tell, for scientific rigor, for example. And so there's no footnotes to go to find out where that information came from. So you run the risk of both plagiarism but copyright issues as well. The accuracy part was highlighted where it said sometimes it may produce inaccurate results. And that's why you would have, when we go back to those initial uses, there's a lot of uses that are about producing draft documents. And so my word of caution is if you're going to use it for a draft, you still need to make sure that you are 100% happy with every fact or aspect that you then that is in that statement, that response, that draft that you've produced. And then the other thing to be mindful about is security as well. And it's many of you probably deal with issues where you think at the moment about where's that data stored? Where are the servers that data's been stored on? Now, I've only done a little bit of looking into this, but OpenAI itself has a lot of its servers in the US. It's involved with with Microsoft platforms as well. But I haven't been able to find a clear answer about if I use it in Australia, where that information I put into it is going. And the other issue is that if you go direct to the source and you go to OpenAI's website and your account there, that's one thing. But if you go to the App Store at the moment, there's dozens, hundreds of apps that now are charging you money, and we don't know where that information is going through before it gets back to its source engine or server. And so I'd be mindful about where you put any of your commercial in confidence information into a system where you're not exactly sure where it's going. And the other thing is you've got to be open about that you've used it. Is what's starting to become the reality. There are some journals, some educational institutions that have just banned the use of things like ChatGPT, and there are others that now cite them as co-authors. So you go and look at the instructions for authorship these days, and there are some that actually tell you that you can use ChatGPT for the abstract. As long as you did the work, you can use it for the abstract. Others say if you use it anywhere through there, you have to cite it as an author. So probably be the most cited author in the world in a year's time, if not already. And I think that's important because that's one thing for me. For my first few months, I never told anyone at work that I'd used it in anything I'd produced. Whereas if I was going to produce something tomorrow of any substance where I did use it, I would be open about that. And I think that creates a whole other discussion in your organisations about what your views are on that. I started this discussion by saying that I thought this would be an interesting topic for many of you here. You know, the CIA Congress, lots of managers in the room, from frontline managers up to senior executive. And hopefully, if you haven't dabbled or played with ChatGPT or other types of generative AI before, you've got something out of this talk. Hopefully, if you've used it before, I've given you a couple of little tidbits here or there. As I said at the start, I'm actually not any great SME in this space. I've just learnt a bit as I've gone, and because I've had an interest in some of the more legal aspects, I've delved into those a little bit as I've gone. If you want to have a play, if you want to do anything, the OpenAI site, you go up to the products part at the top. ChatGPT is one of the many products the company produces. And I would say just start having a play with it and give it some instructions. There's a free version, see what comes back. It is an art to learn exactly how you do it to get the best results straight away, but just be mindful of those limitations and be cautious as you go. Thank you.
Stay there, Marty. You need one of them.
Woohoo.
Of course. 4 million questions from me and a few from the audience. Okay. I just want to say very quickly, so I'm at uni as well, doing my Masters in Public Health, had a particularly heavy week a couple of weeks ago work-wise, and so I thought, I'm just going to give this a go, very, very new to this. And I put in whatever it was that I was looking for it to give me a sort of structure for it, and I asked for it to be referenced. Mm-hmm. So that I knew where the information had come from and then could reference appropriately or go to those links and find out more for myself. And the message that it came back with, word for word, was, I don't know where my information comes from. Yeah. That's what it says. So they're explicit about that they don't know where it comes from. So there's that. Okay, questions. If you ask it the same question several days in a row, does it give you essentially the same response?
Yes. So it doesn't change its messaging or its final outcome. So but it will change words, and how it expresses it will change. So it's not going to come up with a definition of artificial intelligence that's completely different, but it will change how it actually presents it to you, and you can actually ask it about that as well. So one of the things I didn't go into is that with this version of GPT, the ChatGPT, it's designed for you to gauge in a conversation, and so you can ask follow-up questions just like we would having human-to-human interaction. So if you asked about what is ChatGPT and it gave you the answer, you could literally say, tell me more about the pre-trained aspect of the model. What does that mean? And then it will go into that aspect for you. Mm. And then if you do come back the next day and ask the same thing again, you'll probably find that it's 98% the same, but there are some differences. What it doesn't do at the moment is change because of updates that I'm aware of with the with its data sources. So there was, if you go back, but that's changing. So if you go back in time, so the pre-trained part of it, from what I know in 3.5 is September 2021. And if you go back 6 months, there was a lot of information out there that talked about how it's not actively using internet information. It's using its source material that it had that's built into the model. But there's information in recent months that says that it now does have live access through some plugins to internet material. So I don't know enough about the technology behind that, but I imagine that is just one of those next steps now it's going down to be able to become more up to date.
And just to piggyback off what Marty said, I think one of the key differences between, say, using Google is that you plug something into Google and that it doesn't matter whether you're Marty or me or Jane or Emma or Tom or a 7-year-old, it's going to give you the same information back when you're Googling. With ChatGPT, you can say at a master's level, at a high school level, at an executive level. So you can inform the tone that you want it to come back with, just as an FYI. Another question, what are your thoughts, Marty, on use of ChatGPT to generate a clinical practice guideline, first draft obviously, to generate ideas from what's out there?
Yeah, look, I think that's the key part there. Look, if you would use it for ideas, then that's fine. The big issue with paramedic guidelines, a lot of guidelines around the world in the last decades, is that we didn't have referenced guidelines. I can't tell you where some of the things in the current New South Wales Ambulance guidelines come from. And obviously when you start to look into high quality guidelines of the future and ones that get appraised with tools like the Agree To tool and the like, part of that quality assessment is actually knowing where that information comes from. So once it gets to the point of even drafting, really you've got to start there with your source materials, my view, and obviously so that we've got that, you can use those quality assessments of the material that's informing your guidelines.
Someone from within the room has asked me to get a sense of, from within the room, how many people have used ChatGPT, which is a great idea. Can I get a show of hands for anybody who's given it a go thus far?
Nice. What, 60% or something?
Is that what you would have expected?
Yeah. Look, so I think what I found was back in March, it was probably 10, 20% of people.
Yes.
And when I talked about it at work, no one was using it. That's where I thought it was a good idea for a presentation.
Yeah.
And then even in the months leading up to this one, the amount of people who've said, well, no, I use it now, made me think, ooh. And so that's where I had to twist the presentation a little bit to highlight more the limitations at the end to try and give something to the audience.
Yes. One thing that I was interested in, at my university, unlike yours, they are actually open to us using ChatGPT as long as we say that that's where the information has come from. And you mentioned Turnitin, so that technology that is used to work out whether we've plagiarised or whatever. I've got a question about job applications, which I think is relevant to that, because we don't have access to a Turnitin. When we are assessing job applications, the question is, how would you distinguish real versus auto-generated responses when considering applicants?
Yeah, look, to be honest with you, I don't know. I think what I realised from playing with it is that the ChatGPT version of what they produced, given the limitations we normally put on words and character limits, just produced a well-structured response. I think the key thing there is if there's no specifics or context to the individual, then you might go, well, this is generic, this could be anyone. I think, and I think that's the part where you might want to probe an applicant in the future if it's just too generic. But I think someone who actually uses it to draft their response and then they tailor it and actually apply the specifics or context that they've experienced, I think it's going to be really hard to turn the difference between the ChatGPT generated answer that's then been contextualised and edited versus just a really good answer. But I suppose I just got a little bit biased by the fact that I saw too many poor answers for a while that, I don't know, I think some of my staff probably need to use it.
Yes. No offence. The other option to whoever asked that question is to plug it in. Plug it into ChatGPT and say, application for a da-da-da-da role at blah, 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 blah. See what it comes back with. You'll realise very, very quickly if you're reading similar stuff. So that's another option as well. It would also, just an idea, is that it also might give you, some kind of sense of what things you might want to expect. Like I think your key message is like it's worth having a play around.
Well, I think
right?
for me, in that context, it'd just be a focus more of where I target my questions at the interview phase as well.
Yeah.
Because, do I want a staff member who's up to date with developments in technology, who can utilise new technology, who knows how to prepare a good written response? Like, starting to tick a lot of boxes for what I want from a staff member. I just then want to make sure that I'd probably come almost straight out and ask them, and then just make sure that they're also aware of the strengths and weaknesses of the tool they're using.
Yeah. I have to admit, one of the ways that I've been using it is plugging something in, having a read of what it gives me back, just to give me an idea of whether or not my thinking was on the right track. Is there something glaring that I've missed? To sort of start the process and then take that and kind of make it my own. Last question, do you think it's plagiarism if you put your own referenced work into ChatGPT? How would you do that?
So some people, a lot of people when they first use it, for example, especially those of us who come through the generations of, Microsoft Word in the 90s having spell and grammar checker, right? And then you move up through different aspects, whether you use things like Grammarly or other products, online for spelling and grammar. Some people's first efforts is they literally take their work, put it in and say, summarise this for me.
Yeah.
So I think
that must be what
yeah,
you do.
I think in that context, it's not plagiarism. But the issue is, and the reason why, from what I've gathered, some journals are happy for you to use it to create the abstract, is that generally the abstract to your article's not referenced. It can be, but it's generally not. And then all the material that produced that is then in the body of your research paper.
Yes.
And so I think that's where you've got to be careful. One of the issues you have is that if you put your body into it, even though you then know afterwards you can reattach all your references, changing of some words and terms here and there can sometimes change how a reader interprets something of what when they're reading it. So I think I'd just be very careful at the moment. If you're producing something that needs, references, in-text citations, I just think that's a limitation you have to be mindful of.
Well, and to Marty's earlier point, if you're putting in something that you've worked, so you're putting in a paper that's going to take months and months to get published for your peers, that's new work, possibly groundbreaking work, would you trust putting that work into ChatGPT and saying, click, summarise this for me?
Again, I would for my abstract, but not the rest of it.
Yeah, right, okay. But how does it create the abstract if you don't put the bulk of the work
Oh, no,
in?
so yeah, you
That's
put
what
it
I'm
in.
asking.
Yeah, so you put it in still, and
Yeah.
you can then say, create a abstract for an academic journal of X words, and it will summarise it down for you, potentially.
But are you worried about what it's doing with the information that you've just put in?
Again, yes and no, but I'm going to proofread that abstract and be happy with it anyway. So,
Of course.
yeah.
I just imagine if you opened up the Medical Journal of Australia and you're like, this is my paper. Where did they get this from?
I don't think I have to worry about getting published there. But anyway.
Authored by ChatGPT. Okay, please join me in thanking Marty Nichols. Thank you so much.